Hello friends, my name is Tandava and it's a pleasure to be joining you virtually today from Ananda, Palo Alto. We'll start with reading from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Week 34, How Should We Meet Our Tests? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. Last week, we considered Satan's temptation of Jesus in the wilderness after his baptism by John. We discussed the question, does Satan exist? All of us experience temptation of one kind or another in our lives, some of us frequently, others only occasionally. Whether temptation comes to us from our own subconscious or from outside ourselves is secondary to the fact that it does come and that we must deal with it. More important, then, is the question how to deal with it. In fact, how to deal with tests of any kind. Martin Luther flung an ink pot at the devil, who had appeared to test him. A dark stain on the wall of Luther's cell is pointed out to tourists in support of this story. Unfortunately, our trials are not often so summarily dismissed. As a fellow monk once said to Swami Kriyananda, speaking of Satan, "If only I could get my hands on him!" Jesus, during his temptations in the wilderness, overcame them, and thereby set an example for all time by clinging the more determinedly to God. As Paramhansa Yogananda used to say, darkness cannot be driven out of a room with a stick. Once you turn on the light, however, the darkness will vanish as though it had never been. Jesus manifested this principle. The Bible tells us, therefore, that at last the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. In the Bhagavad Gita, the point is clarified further by the added explanation that there are three qualities in human nature: sattvic, or spiritually elevating, rajasic, or ego-activating, and tamasic, or spiritually darkening. It is this triune aspect of human nature that the third chapter refers to with the words, "As fire is hidden by smoke, as a mirror is dulled by rust, and as an embryo is enclosed in the womb, so is the indwelling self enveloped by desire." Yogananda explained that each of these examples describes one of the qualities, or gunas. Sattva guna, that which elevates our consciousness, can be freed of any identity with ego by a little puff of meditation and right affirmation. Rajoguna, which embroils the ego in restless activity, can be worked off with a little more and a little longer effort. Tamoguna, embracing as it does such mental states as laziness and stupidity, can only be outgrown in time, since it inhibits even the desire for self-improvement. The example Jesus gave us was intended more for those in whom sattva guna is predominant. But if you yourself find elements in your consciousness that resist even the effort to cling to God in prayer and meditation, don't despair. Patience, as it has been well said, is the fastest path to God. As long as your efforts take you steadfastly in the right direction, you will come out right in time. Remember Yogananda's words, "A saint is a sinner who never gave up." If, however, your nature impels you, even against your will, to move in the wrong direction, toward egoic desires and away from God, strive at least to detach yourself mentally from your wrong actions, which are induced by habit. The time will come when their own stored-up energy will tire and diminish. At that time, if you have not contributed to that energy by your consenting will, you will find it possible at last to redirect your energies more constructively. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. But for a little more Holy Scripture, we'll read Whispers from Eternity by Paramhansa Yogananda, number 66. Burn thou my frailties in the furnace of trials. In the furnace of trials, the ore of my life is being purified. The fire of experience melts away all my delusions' dross. O divine artisan, burn away all my impurities. Bring out in me the steel of endurance, and hone it to a fine edge by deep calmness. Forge in me from the tempered steel of mental balance, sharp swords of self-control and firm tenacity. With the weapon of inner equilibrium, teach me to fight every enemy of distraction. I like this reading from Whispers from Eternity because of the image of fire. And recently I've just been feeling very much attuned to the fire ceremony that we do before our Sunday service. I'm not sure if you're doing it there in person in Portland yet. We have been in Palo Alto. We do the fire ceremony even though we don't yet do purification in person. But the image of offering yourself into the fire, like in this poem, the metal is offering itself into the fire to be forged, tempered into steel and forged into a weapon to battle delusion. And it has to go through this fire, but it is doing it in order to become something better, and it's offering itself wholeheartedly into it. And when we perform the fire ceremony, that's what we're doing. We're offering ourselves into the fire, symbolically with the ghee representing our devotion, with the rice representing our karma. And this is the consciousness that we want to have when we do the fire ceremony. That's not just these items, but it really is ourselves that we're offering into the transformational fire of this ceremony. And it's that concept of self-offering as opposed to holding back and trying to protect yourself, but just opening up and giving yourself into this powerful, transformative grace of God. Is the power of the fire ceremony, and it's something I'm going to come back to in a little bit in this talk. Though I'll mention right now, if you watched Spiritual Renewal Week online this year, I remember watching the Sunday service at the end of it, and Jyotish and Devi were doing the fire ceremony. And in Palo Alto, we just have a bowl of rice, and we pick out a few grains, and we toss it in each time we do the mantra. He had a spoonful, and he was just scooping them out and putting piles of rice in there, and just burning up lots of karma. And I loved at the end, he just had the remaining bowl of rice there. He just dumped it all in the fire. I just said, yes, that's the way to burn up all that karma. I loved it. So let's get back to where we left our hero last week, up on the Mount of Temptation, being tempted by the devil. And well, I'll start by saying that temptation is kind of a word that I've not usually related to very much. It seems awfully grand for my little life. I never go up to the top of a mountain and have a devil appear to offer me power over all the mortal lands or anything like that. But if we sort of expand our concept of it, I can see there are lots of times that I'm tempted to do things that, I could do better than that. It might be tempted to have a bad attitude. I might be tempted to put out a little less energy into something that I'm trying to do and just maybe not do my best. And these are temptations, and in a way they're more insidious. It's easy to think, yeah, if Satan here told me to fling myself off a cliff to prove that God would save me, I'm pretty sure I could say no. I don't really want to jump off a cliff anyway. And it'd be obvious, Satan's there, probably a warning sign. But it's the sneaky little things that this is good enough. Oh, I don't really have to apologize, it's probably okay. These little bits that we think are not important, but they're just our way of not stepping into everything that we actually can be. And that's the temptation, to stay small and not to grow. So temptation is really relative to where you are. And, Yogananda offered prayers for a lot of things that really relate to us personally, as individuals, as egos. If you read, for instance, the Wisdom of Yogananda series, you'll find lots of prayers. He gives you prayers for finding a job, prayers for finding someone to marry, prayers for health, all these things that it seems like, well, this is just about me. Shouldn't they all be things like whispers from eternity, just take me right to God, purify me in the furnace of trials. But no, he recognizes that we're at all different levels, and if we have an honest need for something, or perceive that we do, it's a lot better that we turn to God and ask God for that in the right way. Whereas Jesus was in a different situation. He had already realized his complete oneness with everything, and Satan was trying to draw him back down to a perception of himself as a separate egoic identity apart from everything else. And so something that, if I had the faith and the opportunity to ask God to turn bread into stone into bread, I should say, not the other way around, perhaps that would be the right step for me at some point, but it was definitely a step backwards for Jesus. And I'll take a little side trip here, actually, to the Mount of Temptation, because I got to go there last year, just before COVID started. Palo Alto ran a pilgrimage to Israel, and one of the places we went was the Mount of Temptation, and it's an amazing place. You just go up this imposing mountain, and there's actually a monastery carved like 1,200 feet up on the side of the mountain. I don't know how they did it, but it's literally hacked into the rock, and you look out the windows and there's a sheer drop down to the valley below. It's amazing. And you can get up and you can see the rock where Jesus sat when he was tempted by the devil. And one of the amazing things about this pilgrimage was, first of all, how many of the ancient sacred sites are basically rocks, because of course rocks are what last for 2,000 years, but also the fact that you can just go up and touch them. I mean, you can put your hand in the hole where the cross stood, you can touch the rock of unction where Jesus' body was laid. They just let you go right up to it. I was just amazed and I loved it. But the Mount of Temptation was different. Once you got to the actual rock, they had it encased in glass. You couldn't touch it. And interestingly, as soon as I noticed that, I really wanted to touch it, so there's a little lesson in temptation right there. But anyway, I got to go up and I got to see the rock, and I sat next to it for a little bit, and I was kind of bummed that I couldn't actually touch it. But I noticed that it wasn't a separate, boulder or anything like that. It was actually just an outgrowth of the mountain itself that happened to be an appropriate size and height to be like a seat. But it wasn't a separate unit. And I walked down the stairs from where that was, and I was just sort of running my hand along the walls, the rock walls, because the monastery is carved out of the rock. And I realized, this is the same stone. I am actually touching the stone of temptation. And I went down to the chapel below, and I just sat with my back against the rock wall of the mountain, and I meditated there. And I realized that this was Jesus' consciousness, was the entire mountain, even the entire planet that the mountain is embedded into. And Satan was just up there going, oh, no, this little bit that you're sitting on, that should be you. Just that. Just forget all the rest. Just pretend you're just this little thing. And that was what would have been the constriction of Jesus' consciousness if he had succumbed to this temptation. Given this relativity of temptation, I started wondering how this relates to Yogananda's story of the two penniless boys in Vrindavan. And a lot of you will remember the chapter in Autobiography of a Yogi, where his brother Ananta challenges him and his friend to spend a day in Agra and see the sights and have all their meals without bringing any money of their own, without asking for help or begging, but just letting God take care of them. And Master succeeds in this, naturally, and it's a glorious story. But I started wondering when I was thinking about this reading, well, isn't he just doing what Satan was tempting Jesus to do? Why was this the right thing? Because Master was an avatar. He hadn't yet fully come into his role as an avatar, as a guru, but he was born with that consciousness, and he was sharing this story for our own edification. He wouldn't have put it in the book if it wasn't important for us somehow. So why does it seem like he's answering the challenge of Satan to force God to turn stones into bread to support him when he could have helped himself? And I think the answer to this is in Ananta. Ananta, his brother, was the context of it. And Ananta was telling him, money first, God can come later. Who knows, life may be too long. And Yogananda countered with, God first, money is his slave. Who can tell, life may be too short. And you can see there that even though this challenge is about getting their physical bodies and their egos around the city and getting them fed and everything, that's not where Yogananda's consciousness was. His consciousness was on God, and money is his slave. He did not feel, I have to make sure I feed myself because, something could happen to this body. He just offered himself completely into this challenge, this test, with no thought of himself. And even Ananta was not even presenting it like Satan did, as this has to be about you. He was interested in God. Can God actually do this? And of course, I'm sure Yogananda felt sort of the inner sanction of God that, yes, this is okay, this is the right thing to move forward with, because he did it, and it worked, and it actually made a convert of his brother who took Kriya Yoga initiation that evening after Yogananda returned victorious in the challenge. Another interesting word in this reading is test, and that's another one I don't like. It's right up there with temptation. I mean, nobody likes being tested. It has this connotation of God's just imposing something on us to see what we can do. And of course, God doesn't need to test us. Like, he already knows what we're capable of and how we're going to do. And so that just sort of adds a little bit of resentment, maybe, if you're in that kind of a mood. But it is important for us to realize what we can do. And often we don't step up to our full potential until we really get a challenge in front of us. And honestly, we want these qualities, these abilities that are being tested in us. Maybe that doesn't go for everybody in the world, but by the time you've come to a place like Ananda, by the time you've learned to meditate, we're interested in improvement, expansion. We actually want to be better. We want to be all these things that these tests are drawing out of us. And so part of the challenge is to simply realize that and not get caught up in the details of what's happening, but remember the broader picture of how are we growing through this? How are we getting closer to God? Some years ago there was a movie called Evan Almighty, and I really don't remember much of it at all except for one particular scene where we have Morgan Freeman playing the part of God. He's come down sort of incognito and he's comforting, I believe it's the wife of Evan, the main character. He's comforting her. And he says, this doesn't sound like a problem to me. This sounds like an opportunity. If somebody prays for patience, they're going to get opportunities to be patient. If somebody prays for courage, they're going to get opportunities to be courageous. You can't just be filled with feelings of courage while you're eating your breakfast cereal. There's nothing for it to relate to there. You're going to have to be in a situation that requires courage. If you pray for love, you don't just get zapped with warm, fuzzy feelings. You get opportunities to really deliberately express and receive love. And so these things that look like tests, look like challenges, they're really chances to experience these aspects of God, like love, like joy, to a greater extent, because we have to raise that energy level to feel these qualities, even in the midst of whatever's going on around us. Around the same time I saw that movie, I encountered a poem by Arthur Gatorman called Hills. And it's a beautiful poem. I recommend looking it up. but the final two lines are beautiful. God give me strength to climb, and hills for climbing. And I just love how the two go together. What's the point of praying for strength if you don't have the opportunity to use it? And the poem is about just reveling in hiking and climbing these hills. And I think it's because that strength to climb, that energy is an aspect of God, and it's the opportunity to take what could be a roadblock, a giant hill, and instead experience it as a flow of God through you. And any of the aspects of God can be felt this way and may be appropriate to different tests and challenges that we have. Love, peace, calmness, joy, wisdom, energy. All of these, our tests are opportunities to feel these things and to let God flow through us in these ways, even in the difficult situations. And I was also thinking about the sort of this metaphor of tests, and I'm a school teacher, so naturally I go to the tests that we give or get in school. And I was thinking, it's not really nice to just give a test cold. You want to teach the kids things. You want to give them homework. You want to maybe give them quizzes and work up to the big tests. Our problem in real life is that we don't call something a test until it has gotten very difficult and it is a test, and then we feel like we've not been prepared for it. One of the phrases Asha uses a lot that I really like is practice when it's easy. Notice when you have just really little tests. They're not that difficult, but you can just consciously go, I'm not going to let my ego get in the way of this little thing. I have a preference for this, but everybody else I'm with wants to do that. I'm just going to step back, not worry about it. And just any little things where you can practice setting your ego aside and going with a greater flow, we should take advantage of them. And similarly, it occurred to me that our homework practice is, guess what? Meditation. If real life gives us our tests, meditation is our homework. That's how we get ready for our tests. Lahiri Mahashaya famously would recommend Kriya Yoga for any problems that disciples brought to him because of how it just uplifts their consciousness and gets them in a better position to deal with whatever they have in front of them. And of course Yogananda says in his autobiography that one breath of Kriya Yoga is equivalent to a year of spiritual development. And I was meditating on that at one point recently and just trying to feel like, how does this one breath really relate to that kind of spiritual development? And I noticed, it helped me really focus and get more intensely concentrated on my meditation. And I noticed how much of a tendency, even in the space of one breath, there is for your energy, your attention to be pulled off to the side. We want to stay right here in the center, in the spine, at the spiritual eye. And even just in one breath, feeling the energy moving up and down the spine, I could feel it wanting to go out to the side. And I could feel that that effort and attention required to keep it right there. And I thought about how most of our lives tend to be spent with our energy just going everywhere, and how hard it is to bring it back. And we're just condensing that process right here into nothing but the breath and the energy when we do Kriya Yoga. And you can approach your other meditation techniques the same way if you don't have Kriya Yoga yet. When you're doing Hong Sa, our attention is here at the spiritual eye, and it wants to go everywhere. And just remember, this is where we keep it. All these other distractions, that's Satan tempting us in the wilderness, as it were. And we don't have to succumb to it. And we can practice there where it doesn't feel like there's anything greater at stake, because we're just there on a meditation cushion. But then when something comes up in our life that really wants to pull us off center, we have that practice, we've done our homework, and we can meet that test by keeping ourselves centered. I have a funny story about this from when I was really a brand new meditator. I had learned Hong Sa, and that was it. And at the time, I also had a friend who was a fantastic baker, but I had not really realized to what extent yet. And we were at a party or a get-together or something, and she had made brownies, which were her specialty, and they were rich and moist and chocolatey and huge, and I ate about 5 of them before I even realized what was happening. And so my stomach was not happy. I went home and I tried to meditate that night, and it did not seem like it was going to go well at all, and I was really very tempted to just go to bed. But I had made a promise to myself to really try and be regular and get a good meditation habit going. So I sat down and I sort of thought about it. I went, well, the last place I want my attention right now is in my stomach because I ate too many brownies. So I'm really going to focus extra hard and put my attention at the spiritual eye. And I actually had really a fantastic meditation. I would not recommend this as a general advice for anybody learning to meditate, but in that particular case, it was a really powerful way of making lemonade out of lemons, or just of rising to a challenge, to a test, by focusing in the right direction on our meditation practice, on God. And really, when we have the question that this reading today asks, how do we meet our tests? That's the main answer, is the way we do it is directionally toward God and away from the ego, whatever that means in any given context. Another interesting sort of pattern that I've noticed a lot in my life since coming to Ananda is that nearly every time I've gone up to visit Ananda Village or the meditation retreat, I've had something occur just beforehand that made me almost decide not to go, made me reconsider it. And for a long time, number of years, it really was literally any time I thought about going to the village and scheduled something and was about to leave, something would come up. When I went up to get my Kriya initiation, it was winter, and on the drive up, I realized I was starting to get a cold. And you know that feeling when it's coming in, and there's a certain point at which you go, it's too late for the vitamin C, it's too late for whatever, this cold is coming. And that's where I was on the drive up, and I was just thinking, I don't know what Kriya Yoga is yet, but I know it involves breathing, and if I have a cold, this might actually be a real problem. And so most of the drive up there, I was praying, but I was thinking about this temptation to pray for oneself, and I had heard that Swami Kriyananda would typically not pray for himself. And I didn't really want to go there either, but I realized learning Kriya Yoga is a good thing. Being on the spiritual path is a good thing. Everything that I'm trying to do right now about going to Ananda Village and getting Kriya Yoga initiation is right and good. And God wants me to do it. And Master wants me to do it. And so the way I was praying was, first of all, I said, I would prefer not to get sick. God knows we have opinions, so why hide it? I always just put them out there. All things being equal, I would just as soon not be sick. But here's the important part. I want to be able to get Kriya initiation. I want to be able to do it properly and learn it properly, because you only have your first Kriya initiation once. And I wanted it to be good. And it was very interesting because my cold, it had gotten to that point where it felt like the point of no return, but it never got worse. And I was able to do what I needed to do to learn Kriya Yoga. And later on the next week, I got a full-blown cold, and it was horrible, and I was stuffed up and a sore throat and everything. But it got me through the initiation, which is what I really needed, what was really important. That prayer was answered. And I've remembered that a lot. like I said, I still have opinions, I still have things I want to pray for myself, but I also try to zoom out as much as I can and just sort of think about, is there a bigger picture reason why I want this to happen? Because I want to be able to teach this class. Something else in my life has to work out, or I have to not get sick, or whatever it is, so that I can help other people. And that's been a good practice for me that I've found. Going back to the village trips again, it really was interesting how many things would come up. The first time I ever went to the village, I was just at the beginning of a brand new romantic relationship, and that was very hard to leave for 2 weeks to spend up at the village, but I did. There were other times when family members were sick, and I felt bad about going, when work felt very precarious and I didn't think I could leave my job. When I worked at East West, we usually had a magazine publishing cycle that was kind of in the throes of things around the time of Spiritual Renewal Week, and I would end up working some at Spiritual Renewal Week, but it always worked out, and generally once I actually got to the village, things would be okay, and the pattern was so strong that it really stopped feeling like a coincidence. It started feeling like a deliberate temptation, like, don't go do nice spiritual things, just stay home, stay small, keep it easy. One of the most dramatic was actually, this was a Spiritual Renewal Week also, I had just a day or two before twisted my knee pretty badly, and I was worried just about the drive up there. It's a 4-hour drive, and I don't have cruise control, and it was my right knee, and I was going to have to be working the gas pedal for 4 hours to get there, and just that sounded horrible for my knee. Never mind camping, hiking around back and forth to the expanding light in the amphitheater from my tent and all of that. But at this point, I had had enough experiences that I had a new motto, which is that if the question is Spiritual Renewal Week, the answer is yes. So I just said, all right, maybe my knee will just be in agony on the drive up, and maybe I'll just have to sit there and not go anywhere for the entire Spiritual Renewal Week. At least I will be there. I'll be in the vibe. I'll be with all my Guru Bhais. It's good enough. That's what I'm going to focus on. And I drove up there. My knee was not happy on the drive up at all. And I got out of the car and I signed in at the expanding light. And I started walking across to the meadow to find where I would set up my tent. And literally, by the time I crossed the meadow, my knee was completely fine. It was fine for the rest of the week. Nothing came back. It just, boom, like that. So it was, it's hard to say it's Satan, because it doesn't feel that glorious as Jesus on the mountain, but that's it. These things show up in our lives, and you just go, wow, something was really trying to keep me from getting here. And I got here anyway, and it gave up. And it doesn't give up permanently. We have to keep going through these tests. But it's fascinating to see them happen. And then to feel that comfort from God, from Guru, when we do pass through a test like that. And it just felt like such a glorious gift. I was ready to just hobble around that Spiritual Renewal Week with a busted knee, and I would have done it, and I would have been glad to be there. But it was just a gift that he didn't have to give me, but he did, which makes it so sweet. One of the aspects of God is the sound of Om, which in the Bible at one point is referred to as the Comforter, because it's this vibration that is part of all of us, and it's so comforting to be connected to everything, to realize that you're the entire mountain and not just the little rock, to realize that nothing in the world can harm you because there's nothing that is not you, because you are one with Om, one with everything. And on that note, I want to end with a little story from Vivekananda. So Swami Vivekananda, when he was a young disciple of Ramakrishna, he had a family to support, and he was out of a job, and he was just running around the city like crazy every day trying to find a job and having no luck at all. And he went to see his guru, and he knew that Ramakrishna had visions of Divine Mother, on a regular basis. And Vivekananda said, "Sir, when you see Divine Mother, will you pray for me? Will you ask her to help me?" And his guru said yes. And Vivekananda went away, came back the next day, and he said, "Did you see Divine Mother? What did she say?" And his guru said, "Oh, sorry, I forgot to ask." And he said, "Okay, well, we'll ask her tonight if she can help me." And he goes away and he comes back the next day. "Did you ask Divine Mother?" And his guru says, "Oh, I forgot to ask." This happens the third day. "Oh, I forgot to ask." And at that point his guru says, "If you meditate tonight, I think you will have a vision of her. You can ask her yourself." And Vivekananda goes to a special place that he knew Ramakrishna had often had his visions of Divine Mother, and he meditates there. Divine Mother came to him, and he spent a glorious meditation with her. And afterwards he went to his guru to thank him for the experience, and his guru said, "Well, what did she say about your problem?" Vivekananda said, "Oh, I forgot to ask." Because in the presence of God, we don't need anything. And I'm sure things were taken care of on a physical plane later on, because that upliftment would just get him in tune with whatever he needed to do. But he was refocused then on what was really important, which was growing ever closer